Imagine the night the Nile roars like a restless beast, and you find yourself stepping into the flickering torchlight of Alexandria's Grand Palace, where Cleopatra's perfume battles the stench of political rot. Hey folks, before we get tangled in serpents and silk, smash that like button if you love a good ancient drama, and drop a comment telling us which modern diva you think Cleopatra would binge watch on Netflix. Now, dim the lights, grab a coffee, or a glass of water if you're trying to survive the desert heat, because this isn't a sanitized museum tour. It's a midnight whisper in a marble hallway. You feel the cool marble under your bare feet, hear the echo of a distant lyre, and smell the sharp bite of incense mixing with the salty sea breeze that sneaks through open windows. While she's plotting a love affair with Julius Caesar, the palace cooks are battling a rat infestation bigger than your inbox on Monday morning. Talk about multitasking. So, ever wondered how a queen could juggle empire, intrigue, and a wardrobe that would make today's influencers weep? Tell me below, and let's uncover the myth behind the legend together. In the sweltering heat of Alexandria's bustling harbor, the scent of salted fish and spices clung to the air like an over-enthusiastic perfume. Young Cleopatra darted between market stalls, her bare feet slapping the dusty cobblestones as merchants shouted over the clamor of donkey bells. She paused before a lacquered mirror, where a faded portrait of a regal queen stared back, eyes flashing with a secret she hadn't yet imagined. The city's gossip swirled like the Nile's eddies, whispering of a royal bloodline hidden in the shadows of the library. Suddenly, a street performer tripped, spilling a cart of figs, and the sweet squish under Cleopatra's shoes reminded her that greatness often begins in the messiest moments. The next day, Cleopatra slipped into the temple of Isis, where incense smoke curled like lazy cat tails around stone pillars. There, the high priestess, draped in linens that shimmered like a midnight screensaver, greeted her with a grin that hinted at mischief. "The gods have woven your name into the tapestry of power," she intoned, her voice echoing off the hieroglyphs, while a gold ibis statue winked from the altar. Cleopatra felt a shiver of destiny rise from her spine, as if the Nile itself had slipped a secret note into her ear. The priestess handed her a scarab amulet, cold and gritty, promising a future that would make even Netflix's The Crown look like a kiddie show. Prophecy, however, is a fickle beast, like a cat that pretends to love you until it knocks over your prized vase. As the priestess spoke of wars and lovers, a laughing child darted past, smearing river mud across the marble floor, reminding Cleopatra that fate often walks in soggy boots. The goddess Isis twirled her scepter, and a sudden gust tossed papyrus scrolls into a chaotic whirl, like an ancient TikTok dance gone rogue. Cleopatra chuckled at the irony. She was being groomed for a throne, while the palace cooks burned their lentil stew, filling the courtyard with a smell that could wilt even a lotus. Still, she swallowed the dread, tasting the metallic zing of resolve on her tongue, and vowed to turn every omen into a stepping stone. Armed with the scarab and a mind sharper than a desert blade, Cleopatra began to rally the city's merchants, soldiers, and even the sarcastic poet who habitually compared her to a cat video. Instant viral fame. She whispered promises of grain-rich granaries and festivals where wine flowed like the Nile after a spring flood, painting pictures so vivid that the crowd could almost taste the honeyed figs. The palace guards, unimpressed by her youthful charm, tested her resolve by throwing a ceremonial dagger that clanged against a stone column, echoing like a bad karaoke note. Undeterred, she seized the moment, brandishing the scarab like a superhero's talisman. and declared, "If the gods want a queen, they'll have to deal with my paperwork." The assembled nobles erupted in laughter and applause, their cheers mingling with the distant cries of gulls and the soft thrum of lyres as the first pale light of dawn slipped over the Nile, turning the water into liquid amber. Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony, the wind tugging at her braid like an eager paparazzo. She inhaled the sharp, salty breath of the sea and the faint perfume of jasmine from the royal gardens, feeling the weight of prophecy settle like a warm cloak on her shoulders. In that moment, she imagined herself as the ultimate crossover, part ancient sorceress, part modern influencer, ready to hashtag history with Ash Queen Cleopatra. The sun rose, casting long shadows that stretched like ancient fingers, and she smiled, knowing the world would soon watch her reign, with both awe and a healthy dose of gossip. With a decisive nod, she turned to face her destiny, the Nile humming below like a soundtrack, waiting for its hero. The night air in Alexandria's palace smelled of spiced figs and the faint metallic tang of fresh blood, as if the city itself held its breath. Cleopatra perched on a gilded throne, her eyes flashing like polished obsidian, and the marble walls seemed to whisper the hiss of a hidden serpent. Servants brushed past her in rustling silk, their footsteps a soft percussion against the echoing corridors. She smiled, but the smile was a blade, sharp, unapologetic, and ready to slice through any plot that dared to approach. Across the marble courtyard, her brother Ptolemy gathered a motley crew of generals, scribes, and disgruntled eunuchs, all clutching wine goblets that clinked like tiny bells of rebellion. He muttered about the throne's Wi-Fi being spotty, a tongue-in-cheek jab at Cleopatra's famed network of spies, while the scent of roasted lamb drifted lazily over the marble steps. Their conspiratorial whispers grew louder, rising like a desert sandstorm that threatened to swallow the palace whole. Yet, even as they plotted, the court's chandeliers twinkled, mocking the drama with their indifferent glitter. When the moon rose, a cloaked figure slipped into Cleopatra's private chambers, his mask bearing the skull of Anubis, the jack of all shadows in Egyptian myth. He exhaled incense, thick as midnight oil, the smoke curling around Cleopatra's crown like a mischievous cat. "You need more than pretty faces and pearls," he warned, handing her a scroll etched with sigils that glowed like neon hieroglyphs. The sorcerer's voice crackled with ancient power, offering counsel that tasted of iron and sandalwood, an arcane recipe for outmaneuvering Ptolemy's treachery. Armed with Anubis's cryptic advice, Cleopatra orchestrated a banquet where the scent of cumin and roasted pigeon masked the sting of espionage. She placed a serpent-shaped wine decanter at the head of the table, its silver scales catching the torchlight and spilling liquid amber onto the polished floor. As Ptolemy raised his goblet, the serpent's faint whisper seemed to coil around his throat, sending a shiver down his spine and a spill of wine onto his ceremonial robes. Laughter bubbled from the guests, oblivious to the subtle poison of politics seeping into the night. When the final note of the lyre faded, Cleopatra slipped away, her sandals barely making a sound on the cool mosaics, the scent of jasmine trailing behind her like a secret. She met Anubis in a shadowed corridor where the magician whispered, "The serpent has tasted blood, but it hungers for more." With a grin sharper than a scorpion's sting, she answered, "Let them think I'm playing chess while I'm actually brewing a potion of chaos." The chapter closed on the echo of a distant hiss, promising that the court's intrigue was far from over, and that even the gods might need a popcorn bucket for the drama about to unfold. The desert wind whipped the sand into a golden haze that stung the eyes of anyone foolish enough to linger near the Nile's banks. Roman legions marched like a gray tide, their metal sandals clanking against the sun-baked stones, casting long shadows over Alexandria's marble facades. High above the bustling market, Cleopatra leaned on her balcony, eyes narrowed like a cat eyeing a mouse, tasting the salty tang of the sea and the metallic promise of war. She could hear the distant cries of traitors and the low murmur of conspirators, each voice a drumbeat in the rising symphony of conflict. In that scorching moment, the queen realized the empire's future hinged on a gamble as daring as a chess move on a board made of sand. When Julius Caesar stepped onto Egyptian soil, his toga flapped like a banner of inevitability, and his legionaries followed, their helmets glinting like a swarm of angry beetles. Cleopatra greeted him with a smile sharper than a cobra's fang, her perfume of lotus and frankincense swirling around the marble steps like an intoxicating fog. Words flew between them, offers of grain, promises of gold, and a kiss that could freeze time, while the courtiers watched as if they were binge-watching a live-action drama. She forged an alliance, sealing it with a golden clasp that sounded like a tiny gong, a pact that would tie Rome's destiny to Egypt's throne. Yet even as they toasted with figs and honeyed wine, the ever-watchful eyes of the priests glimmered from the shadows, ready to pounce on any hint of betrayal. The high priest of Amun summoned Cleopatra to the temple of Ptah, where incense curled like lazy serpents, and the air reeked of burnt myrrh and damp stone. He demanded a sacrificial rite, a lamb drenched in blood to appease the gods, and perhaps to remind the queen who truly owned the sand. Cleopatra felt the weight of the ceremonial dagger, its cold metal biting into her palm, as if the universe itself wanted a selfie with her trembling hands. She promised the offering, but her mind raced like a runaway chariot, fearing that the ritual might cripple her newly minted alliance with Caesar. The tension crackled louder than the temple's torches, a silent joke that even the gods were watching this political soap opera with popcorn. That night, a trusted guard named Berenice, who swore loyalty with more fervor than a fan at a pop concert, slipped a scroll into Cleopatra's hand, its ink still wet with betrayal. The parchment revealed a secret meeting between the guard and a rogue Roman centurion, plotting to siphon the queen's treasury and sell it to pirates for a handful of doubloons. Cleopatra's heart thudded like a war drum as she read the words, the taste of copper flooding her mouth like a bad dental filling. She confronted Berenice in the palace courtyard, where the moon painted the stone tiles silver, and the guard's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and the kind of mischief you'd see in a mischievous cat video. With a swift twist of her scepter, Cleopatra turned the betrayal into a theatrical spectacle, shouting, "Traitor, you missed your cue. Now exit stage left." As guards seized him, his scream echoing like a badly tuned lyre, the betrayal sent ripples through Alexandria, like a stone tossed into a pond of honey, sticky and slow, but inevitable. Caesar, hearing of the plot, rode into the city with a swagger that could have powered a Hollywood blockbuster, swaggering like a Cersei Lannister, storming the Red Keep, declaring that Rome would not be swayed by Egyptian drama. Cleopatra, now more cunning than ever, rallied her soldiers, their armor clanging like a heavy metal concert, and whispered promises of glory that tasted sweet as figs dipped in wine. As the sands of war shifted, the queen stood atop the palace balcony once more, watching the sunrise bleed orange across the horizon, feeling both the heat of the desert in the cool bite of destiny. In that golden hour, she smiled, realizing that alliances and betrayals are merely costumes in the endless play of power. She, the ultimate director, would rewrite the script, one daring scene at a time. The sun slipped behind a thick, bruised cloud, turning the Nile's glittering surface into a silver ribbon of dread. On its banks, Roman legionnaires pounded the earth, their sandals kicking up powdery sand that smelled of sweat and oil. Egyptian archers thumped the air with a chorus of twangy bows, their feathers fluttering like nervous pigeons. In the distance, the river's roar competed with the clatter of metal, and Cleopatra stood on a low sandstone platform, her eyes a storm of calculation. The whole scene felt like a Netflix trailer for an epic that forgot the subtitles. Then, like a plot twist in a sitcom, Cleopatra's own brother, Ptolemy III, swaggered onto the central sandbank. Sword drawn and crown askew, he sneered, "You think you can outwit Rome? I'm the real heir, not some Cleopatra Netflix binge watcher." The two siblings circled, the heat radiating from the sun, making their armor sizzle like fresh bacon. Isis, draped in a veil of midnight blue, seemed to flicker in the corner of Cleopatra's eye, lending her a calm that felt oddly like a yoga app's guided meditation. Their swords clanged, sending sparks into the sky that resembled fireworks at a New Year's party, but with far more blood. The duel crescendoed as Cleopatra feigned left, then spun right, her blade slicing through the air with the elegance of a dancer on a reality TV stage. Ptolemy's strike missed, sending a spray of sand onto a stunned Roman centurion who dropped his gladius, bewildered as if his life had been rebooted. With a swift, ironic flourish, a move that would make a Marvel superhero proud, Cleopatra disarmed her brother and pressed the tip of her sword to his throat, whispering, "Game over, bro." The river's murmur rose to a roar, echoing the cheers of unseen spectators and the faint clink of imperial coins jingling in the background. In that instant, the fate of Egypt hung on a single, glittering moment, as bright and absurd as a meme gone viral. When the dust settled, the Romans retreated, their standards drooping like tired pizza boxes after a night of binge eating. Cleopatra, dripping with triumph and river mud, lifted her arms, and a choir of priests sang a low, guttural chant that sounded suspiciously like a karaoke rendition of an ancient hymn. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood, the sweet perfume of crushed figs, and the lingering echo of distant drums that seemed to chant, "She did it." The kingdom breathed a sigh of relief, but also a sigh that smelled faintly of burnt incense and overdue taxes. As night fell, the eclipse finally slipped away, leaving the Nile to sparkle like a runway, and Cleopatra slipped into the shadows, already plotting her next dramatic season. The sun blazed over Alexandria as the last echo of battle drums faded, and Cleopatra, draped in a tapestry of gold and scarlet, stepped onto the marble balcony of her palace. The air smelled of brine and incense, a heady mix that reminded her of the Nile's muddy breath and the sweet perfume of lotus blossoms. She tightened her grip on the scepter, feeling the weight of a crown that had survived Caesar's betrayal and Mark Antony's dramatic exit, like a Netflix drama that never got canceled. Around her, courtiers whispered gossip like buzzing flies, while the city's streets churned with traders hawking spiced figs and salty fish. With a sly smile, she declared the kingdom stable, even as a shadow of doubt flickered like a candle in a windstorm. Yet the queen's eyes, sharp as a falcon's, caught the flicker of doom in the horizon. Roman legions, marching like an unstoppable tide of sand and steel. She imagined her own demise as a tragic cameo, a cameo worthy of a Marvel villain's dramatic exit, complete with a dramatic gasp and a thunderous soundtrack. In private chambers, lit by oil lamps that hissed and sputtered, she traced the patterns of a cracked mirror, each crack a prophecy of inevitable collapse. The scent of roasted lamb, still hanging in the air, clashed with the iron tang of blood that stained the palace stones from previous battles. She laughed bitterly at the irony that even a goddess could be tripped up by a slippery marble floor. One night, as the moon rose, pale as a spilled pearl, Cleopatra lingered by the river's edge, listening to the croak of bullfrogs and the distant wail of a lone oud. She felt mortality, like a gritty sand slipping through her fingers, each grain a reminder that even the brightest lotus eventually wilts. The cool water lapped at her ankles, whispering secret verses of ancient poets who sang of love, loss, and the fleeting nature of power. She thought of her own reflection, a face half made of myth, half of flesh, and wondered if the gods would remember her smile, or just the scandals that smelled like perfume and regret. With a sigh, she let a single lotus petal drift downstream, a floating meme of destiny, to be carried to the unknown. As the years unfurled like papyrus scrolls, storytellers wove her saga into every tavern tale, each retelling, sprinkling a dash of exaggeration like salt on fish stew. Children in dusty alleys pretended to wield invisible scepters, shouting, "I'm a Cleopatra," while chasing chickens that clucked like gossiping aristocrats. The lotus, now her emblem, blossomed in mosaics, its pink petals glinting against golden grout, immortalizing her name louder than any triumphal arch could. Even the gods chuckled, noting that a queen who could charm a Caesar and outwit Rome was about as likely as a cat mastering karaoke. In the end, her legend rose above the mud, fragrant and stubborn, refusing to dissolve into the annals of forgotten footnotes. Today, scholars trace her legacy like detectives following fingerprints in ancient dust, each clue a reminder that ambition can sparkle brighter than a pharaoh's throne. The promise of her legend, etched into stone, sung by poets, and memified on modern screens, guides new generations to seize power with both grace and gusto, like a dancer on a razor-thin stage. When a young activist raises a flag in Alexandria, she feels the phantom of Cleopatra's perfume, fierce and unapologetic, urging her forward. The lotus bloom, resilient against scorching suns, whispers that even when empires crumble, stories can survive like stubborn graffiti on a crumbling wall. And so the queen's voice, wrapped in myth, still roars across centuries, urging us to write our own epics before the sand finally swallows our footprints. In the 13th year of Thutmose II's reign, the palace buzzed like a Nile market at high tide, the air thick with incense, sweat, and the clatter of sandal-clad courtiers. Young Hatshepsut, daughter of a great queen and a noble mother, slipped through marble corridors, her violet linens brushing polished stone. She watched the sun-baked walls soak up the desert heat, feeling the weight of a crown that still sat stubbornly on her father's head. The scent of fresh lotus blossoms from the garden mingled with the sour tang of a nearby priest's offering of roasted goat. Little did anyone suspect that the shy princess was already rehearsing a script louder than the royal trumpets when Thutmose III, husband co-regent and the kingdom's newest hotshot general, fell to a sudden fever. Chaos erupted like a spilled jar of beer at a festival. Courtiers whispered in the shadowed hypostyle hall, their words weaving a tapestry of doubt. Could a woman rule the land of the sun? The scent of fear was as sharp as the smell of churned butter from the royal kitchens, and the murmurs sounded almost like a bad karaoke rendition of a love ballad. Even the palace cats, usually indifferent, seemed to hiss in disapproval, their ears flattening like the pages of a forbidden papyrus. Yet Hatshepsut's eyes glittered, catching the flicker of torchlight, as if she had just been handed the ultimate plot twist in a mythic Netflix series. Seizing the moment with the swagger of a rock star, stepping onto stage, Hatshepsut declared herself regent, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a scimitar through papyrus. She draped herself in robes of deep lapis, the fabric rustling louder than a crowd-surfing crowd at a concert, and marched into the empty throne room, where the echo of footsteps sounded like drums of war. The court, half stunned and half amused, watched as she raised the scepter, its gold gleaming like a selfie stick aimed at the gods. Priests muttered prayers, their incense smoke swirling into spirals that smelled of cinnamon and ancient gossip. Behind the ceremonial pomp, she quietly commissioned secret scribes to sketch a divine pedigree, laying the groundwork for a story worth a Hollywood biopic. In the dim chambers beneath the temple, Hatshepsut's hidden narrative took shape, each hieroglyph painted with the precision of a comic book artist, sketching a hero's origin. She claimed her mother, Ahmose, had been touched by the goddess Hathor, who whispered plans of a queen who would outshine even the pharaoh's pharaohs, like a Marvel character dropping a surprise cameo. The scent of reed pens and cracked plaster filled the room, while the faint hum of distant chariot wheels provided a rhythm comparable to a movie trailer's drumroll. Scribes tucked this divine endorsement into stone tablets, sealing them with wax that smelled like melted honey and ambition. By the time the sun rose over the western desert, the Empire's mythic script was ready to be unleashed, as inevitable as spoilers on a fan forum. When Hatshepsut finally stepped onto the throne, the palace erupted in a chorus of awe, fear, and the occasional snort of disbelief, like the audience reaction when a plot twist flips the entire series. She wore the double crown, its weight pressing down like a heavyweight belt, yet she smiled, the aroma of jasmine from her hair catching the cool morning breeze. The court, now forced to bow, whispered that the gods had handed them a queen who could juggle wars, trade missions, and fashion with the flair of a TikTok influencer. Yet beneath the grandeur lingered the ironies of power, a woman ruling a patriarchal empire by weaving her own mythology, while the very pillars that once shivered at her gender now stood firm beneath her feet. And so the dawn of a queen blazed across Egypt's horizon, leaving a trail of dust, intrigue, and a story that would echo through millennia like an ancient meme. When the sun rose over Thebes, Hatshepsut stepped onto the throne room floor with a crown that glittered like a freshly minted Instagram filter. The clamor of priests chanting Amun's name mixed with the squeak of sandals on polished limestone, a soundtrack that would make any modern launch event jealous. She wore a false beard, yes, a literal beard, because apparently ancient Egypt didn't have gender-neutral pronouns. Yet the crowd roared, not at the beard, but at the promise of a new era, and the scent of frankincense hung heavy like a perfume ad for eternity. Soon after, Hatshepsut sent her fleet slicing through the Red Sea, reopening trade routes that had been choked by sand and bureaucracy. The ships groaned under loads of myrrh, gold, and exotic spices that smelled like a bazaar on fire, while sailors swore by the gods that the tide never tasted sweeter. Merchants from Punt arrived bearing ivory, ebony, and a cheeky grin that said, "We've survived the desert, now bring us your Wi-Fi." The kingdom's coffers filled faster than a binge-watcher's queue, and the rhythmic slap of oars became the new national anthem. Back home, Hatshepsut commissioned the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a cliffside marvel that rose like a colossal jelly bean stacked on stone. Laborers chiseled limestone with hammers that rang like 1,000 drums, while the air was thick with dust and the smell of sweat and sun-baked bricks, an ancient version of a construction site coffee break. Sculptors carved her image beside the god Amun, giving her a divine glow that even the most skilled Photoshop could not replicate. Tourists of the time, well, the ancient equivalent, scribes with scrolls, would have gawked at the terraces that seemed to kiss the sky, all while the Nile whispered below like a backstage commentator. Hatshepsut's propaganda machine worked overtime, plastering reliefs where she stood tall, arm outstretched, as if saying, "I'm your girl, and I run this place." The priests painted her as Amun's earthly avatar, a divine influencer whose crown was a selfie stick for the heavens. Visitors could almost hear the gods chuckle as the queen posed beside falcons, lions, and the occasional cheetah. Yes, a cheetah, because why not add some extra flair? In the courtyard, incense smoke curled like modern vapor clouds, delivering a message. The queen was both mother and monarch, and not a single peasant could argue with that vibe. Under her rule, Egypt basked in a golden glow of peace, with fields swaying like velvet curtains and markets humming like a well-tuned orchestra. The air tasted of ripe dates and the distant echo of laughter, while soldiers swapped spears for olive branches, much to the amusement of neighboring kingdoms who expected drama. Ironically, after her death, the very legacy she built was scrubbed from stone by a jealous successor, as if someone hit the undo button on history. Yet the stones of Deir el-Bahri still whisper her name, reminding us that even erased queens can leave footprints louder than a marching band on a quiet night. Under Hatshepsut's sun-drenched rule, the marble of Deir el-Bahri gleamed like a freshly polished surfboard, while incense-laden breezes curled around the newly erected obelisks. She ordered stone ships to sail across the Nile, their prow cutting water that smelled of damp reeds and mud. Courtiers whispered that the queen's smile could outshine the desert sun, and merchants from Punt unloaded spices that tingled the palace nose with cinnamon and clove. Yet even as festivals burst with drum beats and laughter, a faint chill lingered in the shadowed alcoves of the royal hall. At 16, Thutmose III strutted through the military quarter in a feathered headdress that made him look like a teenage rock star of ancient Egypt, his sandals slapping against the packed earth. Hatshepsut, ever the savvy mentor, handed him a bronze sword and a ledger of campaigns, teaching him that conquest required more paperwork than blood. The young commander led troops to practice formations, the clang of spears echoing like a garage band. Tuning up, he soaked up her counsel like a sponge, but his eyes glittered with the restless hunger of a gamer waiting for the next level. behind the gilded curtains, priest muttered prayers that sounded more like a grumbling sitcom audience, complaining that a woman on the throne upset the cosmic balance. Their incense-smoked chambers reeked of old papyrus and stale ambition, a scent that clung to their robes like spilled wine. Jealous viziers sharpened their tongues, slipping sarcastic barbs about Hatshepsut's king-size ego into banquet chatter. The palace buzzed with gossip, each rumor a tiny arrow aimed at the queen's crown. Rumors sprouted faster than lotus buds after the flood. Some claimed Hatshepsut was trading secret recipes for eyeliner with foreign merchants. Others swore she plotted to replace the sun god with a dazzling new deity she invented on a whim. A stray cat, perched atop a sacrificial altar, flicked its tail as if signaling the court that something was amiss. The growing shadow felt like a cool draft, slipping under the heavy doors of Hatshepsut's triumph, whispering that every brilliant monument cast a darker silhouette. Even the palace cats seemed to wear tiny frowns, as if they'd seen a spoiler for the sequel. By the time the Nile swelled with the season's flood, the queen's golden aura was tinged with a bruised mauve, the color of bruised berries left too long in the sun. Hatshepsut stood on her balcony, hearing the distant clang of chisels and the low growl of displeased priests, feeling the weight of history press like sand in her sandals. The teenage Thutmose, now more seasoned, tightened his grip on his spear, his stare hinting at a future where he might rewrite the script. In the end, the shadow of the king, though still a teenager, loomed larger than any statue, reminding everyone that power, like sand, slips through even the most polished hands. When the sun's final rays slipped over Thebes, Thutmose III slipped onto the throne like a rookie sprinter at the starting line. The palace corridor still smelled of incense and fresh papyrus, but the air crackled with a new, ruthless energy. Word spread faster than gossip at a royal banquet. The boy king was now the sole ruler, and he was ready to rewrite the script. The court's murmurs turned into low thunder as officials whispered that the era of the woman pharaoh was about to be erased. Even the palace cats seemed to arch their backs, sensing the storm of succession brewing. Thutmose summoned the royal sculptors and handed them heavy iron chisels, demanding they scrub Hatshepsut's likeness from every stone. The clang of metal against limestone rang like war drums, sending a spray of dust that tickled the nostrils of onlookers. Statues that once gleamed with her regal headdress now wore jagged scars, their faces slashed as if a temperamental teen had doodled over a favorite poster. Workers cursed under their breath, muttering that they were turning a masterpiece into a DIY demolition site. By nightfall, the courtyard resembled a half-finished graffiti wall. Only the graffiti was a royal eraser. Next came the king lists, the ancient version of a Wikipedia page, and Thutmose acted like a ruthless editor, hitting the delete key. Scribes peeled away her cartouche, the golden seal of her name, as if extracting a stubborn sticky note from a notebook. The faint aroma of fresh ink mingled with the sour smell of burnt papyrus, a sensory reminder that history was being scorched alive. He bragged to his advisors that this was no ordinary rewrite. It was more dramatic than a Netflix true crime reboot where the protagonist never existed. The irony wasn't lost on the palace gossip. The man who loved to broadcast his victories now tried to ghostwrite her out of existence. The grand temple of Deir el-Barsha, Hatshepsut's crowning jewel, faced a slow-motion demolition, a bit like watching a giant sandcastle being eaten by a hungry crab. Laborers hefted massive limestone blocks, their muscles straining as they shoved them onto carts that screeched over sand-slicked ramps. The air filled with a metallic tang of sweat and the earthy perfume of crushed limestone, a perfume no perfume shop would ever bottle. Each stone that tumbled to the ground echoed a thud that sounded suspiciously like a dropped mic at a rap battle. By the time the sun set, half the temple stood half exposed, a ghostly skeleton that whispered, "We had a queen, and we're not done with you yet." Thutmose justified his purge as a noble quest to restore the natural order, as if he were the Avengers assembling to defeat a rogue superhero. He framed Hatshepsut's reign as a bizarre glitch in the grand simulation of Egyptian patriarchy, a glitch he was now patching with brute force. Yet, amid the rubble and rewrites, a faint chuckle seemed to drift through the palace corridors. History has a way of remembering the bold, even when the present tries to mute it. The irony hung thick as the night air. The very act of erasing her only made her legend louder, like a silent film with a booming soundtrack added later. And so the storm of succession settled, leaving behind a kingdom that would forever whisper the name Hatshepsut, no matter how fiercely it was chiseled away. When the sun set over the endless sands of Thebes, a ragtag team of archaeologists brushed away centuries of gritty desert dust from a darkened chapel. The air tasted of stale incense and the sharp bite of limestone, a perfume no modern museum could bottle. They uncovered hidden reliefs that whispered Hatshepsut, yes, with At, as the architect of an empire they thought belonged only to men. Each carving crackled like an old vinyl record, crackling with stories of ships, temples, and a queen who dared to wear a false beard. In that moment, the eclipse of her memory seemed to lift, letting a bright, stubborn light spill onto the stone. The reliefs showed Hatshepsut's daring trade caravans, slithering down the Red Sea like glittering serpents of cedar and frankincense. She sent sleek wooden vessels, their sails swollen with salty wind, to punt, returning with ivory, myrrh, and the smell of distant rainstorms. Merchants shouted in guttural tongues, their voices echoing off the vaulted chambers, while exotic spices tickled the nostrils of the astonished diggers. Her economy didn't just sparkle, it roared, turning Egypt into a glittering hub that would make even a modern startup founder blush. We can almost hear her whisper, "Move over, men," as the Nile's currents carry her profit-laden barges toward the horizon. Hatshepsut's architectural swagger shone brightest in her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a staircase of limestone that rose like a giant's palm. The walls sang with reliefs of scarabs and deities, their colors still vivid despite centuries of sand-kissed erosion. Visitors today can hear the faint hum of ancient chants reverberating off the cool stone like an echo from a forgotten concert hall. She dared to blend the colossal with the graceful, designing terraces that look like the set of a Game of Thrones chase episode, but with fewer dragons and more papyrus scrolls. Even the scent of river mud clinging to the steps reminded the workers that greatness is built on sweat, crime, and a little divine hubris. The queen's gender sparked a scandal louder than a pharaoh's battle cry, and later priests tried to scrub her name out of every cartouche like a graffiti artist covering a tag. Yet the women of the palace, and later the world's feminists, have taken that erased ink and turned it into a neon sign that says girl power, ancient style. When modern scholars quote her like a pop culture icon, they can't help but picture Hatshepsut in a sleek power suit, swaggering into the Senate of the gods. Ironically, the very act of erasing her only made her legend more magnetic, pulling historians like moths to a midnight flame. In the dusty archives, you can hear the faint laugh of destiny, reminding us that every attempt to mute a voice only amplifies its echo. So the eclipse that tried to blacken Hatshepsut's reign instead became a cosmic joke, where the sun's edge glows brighter against the dark. Her trade routes still hum in the veins of modern markets. Her temples still dominate the skyline, and her story still flickers on museum walls, like a Netflix series you can't stop binge-watching. The scent of incense, the clang of chisel, the taste of salty sea breezes. These sensory threads weave a tapestry that still wraps around our imagination. Every time a child points at her statue and asks, "Who's that queen?" the answer ripples across time, a reminder that even an eclipsed queen can cast a lasting light on Egypt's annals. And so, dear listeners, we leave the sands with a grin, knowing that history, much like a good plot twist, loves to bring the underdog back to center stage. In the sun-splashed courts of the Fourth Dynasty, a restless buzz hovered like beetles over a pile of fresh papyrus. Young Vizier Neferu, whose beard still smelled of sandalwood and sweat, was summoned by a royal courier who ran faster than a desert jackrabbit. Alongside him, the enigmatic priestess Khepri arrived, her robes rustling with the faint perfume of lotus and incense, eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. The pharaoh's messengers shouted commands that echoed off limestone walls, and even the palace cats paused, ears twitching at the excitement. Both Neferu and Khepri sensed that something monumental was about to unfold, like the moment a popcorn kernel finally bursts in a quiet theater. Pharaoh Khafre, towering and proud as a pyramid's apex, declared his desire for a guardian that would watch over his tomb like a bouncer at a celebrity party. He wanted a statue so massive that even the Nile would have to bow its waters in reverence. The court erupted in murmurs. Some officials whispered that the monument would outshine the pharaoh's own ego. A sort of ancient Marvel Avengers assemble, but with more limestone and fewer spandex suits. Neferu was handed a scroll sealed with scarlet wax, its ink still wet, demanding a design that could stand the test of sandstorms and gossip. Khepri, meanwhile, lit a small incense cone, its smoky tendrils curling like the pharaoh's mustache, and offered a silent prayer that the stone would never crack under the weight of future tourists. The search for a hidden quarry took the duo deep into the desert, where the sun baked the ground into a crust as hard as a mummy's wrappings. They found a canyon, cloaked in shadows, its walls echoing the distant clang of chisels, like a rock band rehearsal, gone prehistoric. Dust rose in gritty clouds, coating their faces with a fine, gritty powder that tasted like iron and dried figs. Workers wielded copper pickaxes that sang a sharp, metallic song, each strike sending tremors through the stone that felt like the heartbeat of the earth itself. As the first massive block was freed, a stray camel bleated in protest, as if asking, "Did someone order a giant stone snack?" Back at the royal tent, a hushed prophecy slipped through the night air like a moth landing on a lantern. An old seer, half blind and wholly dramatic, declared that the statue would cradle the answer to the Nile's mysteries, a riddle more tangled than a cat's yarn ball. He muttered that the stone would whisper the river's secrets to anyone brave enough to press their ear against its massive cheek. Think of it as an ancient Alexa, but with more sand and fewer annoying updates. Khepri giggled, noting that if the Nile could talk, it would probably complain about tourists stealing its selfies. Neferu, ever the skeptic, wondered whether the answer was simply a cleverly hidden bathroom, because even gods need to go after all. Thus, the stage was set, with the quarry's echo still ringing in their ears, and a prophecy promising answers that made even the desert foxes raise an eyebrow. Neferu and Khepri returned to Giza, their sandals kicking up clouds of dust that smelled like boiled dates in ambition. The court gathered, eyes wide as the horizon, ready to witness a stone giant rise from the earth like a colossal superhero taking a power pose. As the first marble slab was rolled into place, the crowd hushed, awaiting the moment when the Sphinx would crack a joke about the Nile's traffic jam. Little did they know, this was just the dawn of a saga that would outlast the pyramids, their hieroglyphs, and even my own attempt at humor. Neferu stalked the construction site like a drill sergeant on a caffeine binge, her eyes scanning the sea of sand-caked laborers as they hauled limestone blocks under the blistering sun. The clatter of chisels rang like a rock concert gone rogue, while the scent of sweat and desert dust clung to every worker's skin. She barked orders, her voice cutting through the cacophony, and the men responded with a synchronized rhythm that could rival a marching band. Even the desert foxes paused, ears perked, as if the whole plateau held its breath for the birth of a new wonder. Above the clamor, Khepri squinted at the heavens, deciphering the twinkling gossip of stars as if they were Instagram comments from the gods. He traced Orion's belt and read a sudden flare from Sirius as a green light to carve the lion's muscular torso. With a flick of his wrist, he whispered ancient geometry into the ears of the stonecutters, guiding them to shape a prowling beast with a king's regal visage. The artisans hammered out furrowed cheeks and a crown-like headdress, the limestone dust puffing up like a powdered donut. Every chip of stone sang a tiny triumph, and the half-finished Sphinx began to grin at the rising sun. Meanwhile, a band of rival craftsmen, jealous as a cat at a mouse cafe, plotted to sabotage the masterpiece. They slipped into the quarry at night, swapping fresh lime mortar with sour goat cheese, because nothing says fail like a stinky, curdled mess setting in the cracks. When the morning crew discovered the foul odor, they coughed, gagged, and almost called a pest control divine intervention. A burly foreman, who looked like a walking ankh, chased the saboteurs off with a wooden paddle, shouting, "You think you can ghostwrite the Sphinx? Not on my watch." The rivals fled, slipping on a stray slab, their pride as cracked as the limestone they tried to ruin. Just as the sun reached its zenith, the sky ripped open and a sandstorm roared in, sounding like 1,000 angry camels sneezing. Cranes whipped past the workers, stinging eyes, and coating the half-carved stone with a fine, gritty frosting. When the gale finally sighed away, it left behind a glimmering slab half buried in sand, its surface edged with hieroglyphs that glowed like neon hieroglyphic emojis. Neferu brushed the dust away, feeling the cold, smooth stone under her palm, while the scent of ozone mingled with fresh limestone. The tablet crackled with a warning. The Sphinx would only protect the kingdom if it could answer a riddle whispered by the Nile itself. Khepri read the prophecy aloud, his voice echoing off the rising monument like a DJ dropping a beat at a pharaoh's after-party. He announced that the Sphinx must answer the riddle of the scarab, lest the desert swallow the capital whole. The workers exchanged nervous glances, half expecting the stone to open its mouth and mutter something about the meaning of life. Neferu, never one to shy from drama, declared they would feed the Sphinx riddles like a hungry teenager craves memes. And so, with the wind still humming, the crew set to polishing the gargantuan grin, knowing that every chisel strike might just be the key to keeping Egypt's future from turning into a sand-filled sitcom. When the last limestone block thudded into place, a chorus of murmurs rose from the laborers, the air thick with sweat and the scent of fresh chisel dust. The Sphinx, which had stared impassive for centuries, suddenly flared with amber light that danced across its carved eyes like twin desert lanterns. A low, resonant voice rolled from its stone throat, startling even the scarab-laden hieroglyphics into silence. Balance the sun with the flood, it intoned, each word echoing like a drumbeat against the hot limestone walls. The crowd froze, half expecting the monument to sprout wings. Instead, it simply stared, as if judging their very souls. The verse lingered like a hot wind over the Nile, whispering of a world where the sun's blaze must be tamed by the river's swell. Below the palace, the kingdom choked on cracked earth, the fields cracking like old parchment, the scent of dust choking the breath of every farmer. Priests in linen robes gathered around incense-smoked braziers, their robes rustling like palm fronds in a desert storm. They scratched at the cryptic lines with reed pens, muttering about balance as if it were a cosmic seesaw that could be tipped with a single grain of sand. Outside, the horizon shimmered with the mirage of water that never came, a cruel joke from the gods. High Priest Amun, whose beard smelled of cumin and ancient beer, approached the riddle with the same gusto as a teenager solving a Sudoku puzzle on TikTok. He waved a papyrus scroll, its edges frayed like the last leaves of a dying acacia, and proclaimed, "If we align the sun's zenith with the flood's crest, the Nile will sing again." The younger scribes snickered, recalling legends of a giant cat blocking a laser. Yes, the story of the Sphinx in Greek legend, now retold in Egyptian sand. Their chuckles were cut short when a sudden gust rattled the temple's stone columns, scattering sand into their nostrils like gritty confetti. Undeterred, they pressed on, tasting the metallic tang of desperation as they decoded each symbol under flickering torchlight. Meanwhile, Neferu, the vizier's clever daughter, with a mind sharper than a papyrus reed, found herself tangled in a web of intrigue as sticky as honey-laden figs. Court ministers whispered behind silken curtains, plotting to dismantle the Sphinx before it could speak another word, fearing its prophecy might dethrone the current pharaoh. She sidestepped their accusations with a sly smile, quoting a line from the bard's epic, "Winter is coming," to remind them that power, like sand, slips through even the firmest hands. The palace kitchens wafted with the aroma of roasted duck, a reminder that life goes on even as political storms brew. Neferu's heart thudded like a drum in a marching band, each beat echoing the Sphinx's looming warning. As the sun sank behind the dunes, the Sphinx's amber eyes dimmed, leaving a lingering glow that painted the desert floor in molten gold. The priest finally cracked the verse. They must perform a ceremonial flood at dawn, mirroring the sun's rise, to coax the heavens into mercy. Neferu, armed with a ceremonial staff shaped like a cobra, rallied the skeptics, promising a spectacle that would outshine any royal parade. Think fireworks meets a sandstorm, a true ancient blockbuster. The court's conspirators muttered, their plans now as soggy as stale flatbread, while the scent of wet mud rose, promising relief. And just as the first droplets kissed the parched earth, a distant roar hinted that the Sphinx might have more verses to share, perhaps a sequel worthy of a Netflix binge. Khepri crouched in the waning light of the summer solstice, feeling the desert heat bake his skin like a cheap oven on a cooking show. He stared up at the great Sphinx, its lion body and human face, squinting as if it too were wondering why anyone would schedule a meeting at high noon. A sudden spark of insight struck him. Align the monument with the rising solstice sun, and the ancient engineers might have left a secret waiting like a backstage pass. He whispered to the wind, if you're going to reveal a hidden chamber, do it with style, not a sneaky whisper. And the sand swirled in amused applause. The air smelled of scorching gypsum and the faint tang of papyrus ink, promising that the mystery was about to unfold. As the first golden ray slammed into the Sphinx's nose, a faint click echoed from the stone, louder than a camel's sigh in the night. The great paws shifted, revealing a narrow doorway that smelled of cool stone and a hint of ancient incense, as though the gods had left a scented candle burning. Inside, a marble basin glittered, waiting to catch the sun's fire, and Khepri felt his heart throb. Like a drum solo at a pharaonic rave, he stepped forward, and a hidden chamber opened like a stage curtain, spilling a rush of water that sang a high-pitched whistle, reminiscent of a 90s grunge guitarist, wailing. The sacred spring erupted, spraying droplets that tasted of iron and sweet dates, flooding the floor with a sound like thousands of tiny chariots galloping. The moment the spring burst, the Nile far downstream began to swell, its waters rising like an over-enthusiastic audience at a blockbuster premiere. A fragrant mist rose from the basin, mixing the earthy smell of wet sand with the sweet perfume of lotus blossoms, making the air feel like a spa day for a desert nomad. Villagers on the banks felt the pulse of the water in their bones, hearing the distant roars of distant hippos that sounded suspiciously like the growl of a low-budget monster movie. Khepri laughed. We've got a real-life Titanic scene here, except the iceberg is a sand dune, and the ship is a stone cat. The rising flood sang a hymn of life, coaxing reeds to sway and fish to leap, while the hidden spring drummed its own rhythm against the stone. Just as the celebration peaked, a ragged band of rival priests, dubbed the Desert D-Boys by the locals, sneaked up with torches that hissed like angry snakes. Their leader, a wiry man named Setnak, brandished a hammer shaped like a pharaoh's crook, promising to smash the Sphinx and seize the spring for their own thirsty cult. They shouted, "We'll turn this lion into a chew toy," and hurled rock-filled catapults, each launch sounding like a bad Tinder date, loud, awkward, and ultimately disappointing. The night air grew thick with smoke, the scent of burnt incense, and the metallic tang of fear, while the sand beneath their boots turned to a soggy mush that stuck to their shoes like old chewing gum. Khepri watched, grin half crooked, thinking that this showdown was about as subtle as a gladiator using a selfie stick. Suddenly, the Sphinx's stone eyes flared with a sudden light, and the massive creature shivered as if an invisible DJ had dropped a bass drop that rattled the desert. The statue's paws slammed down, sending shock waves that rattled the rivals' torches, blowing the flames out like someone unplugging a karaoke machine. In a dazzling display, the hidden spring surged upward, turning into a geyser that sprayed water over the attackers, dousing their robes and turning their plans into a soggy mess worthy of a low-budget water park. Setnak slipped, his hammer clanging against the stone, with a comedic clang that echoed like a bad movie tagline, and the desert D-boys fled, shouting, "We're out of here! The cat's got claws!" As the sun set, the Sphinx stood tall, its silhouette a guardian against the night, and Khepri laughed. Turns out the real riddle was, who can't handle a little splash? The crowd cheered, the Nile continued its rise, and the legend inked itself deeper into the sands. When the final roar of the flood subsided, the Sphinx rose like a stone-caked sentinel, its massive paws still damp with river slime and the faint scent of lotus blossoms clinging to the air. The sun struck its granite brow, turning it into a glowing ember against the sky's copper veil, while sandflies performed a lazy ballet around its base. Villagers gathered, their voices a chorus of awe and cracked laughter, as some swore the beast's eyes winked in approval. Even the river, now a gentle ribbon, hummed a low, soothing murmur, like an old bass line in a pharaoh's soundtrack. The monument stood, timeless and a little cheeky, daring any who dared to question its newfound calm. Neferu, the queen maker, turned backyard gardener, slipped from the palace corridors into the shade of date palms, trading silk robes for a straw hat and a trowel. She inhaled the earthy perfume of mud and fresh figs, feeling the weight of centuries lift from her shoulders like a particularly stubborn sandbag. Children followed her, giggling as she taught them to coax seedlings from stubborn soil, while the Sphinx watched, its stony mouth curled in what might have been a smile. She whispered to the wind, "Finally, I can retire, without the roar of bureaucracy behind me, just the gentle sigh of the Nile, and a catnap." The kingdom's heartbeat slowed, matching the lazy rhythm of a distant drum circle she once thought too wild for royalty. Khepri, the young scribe with ink-stained fingertips, set up his wooden desk beneath the Sphinx's shadow, his quill itching to capture the saga for posterity. The clack of his reed pen rang like a metronome, punctuated by the occasional splash of a stray fish leaping from the Nile, adding a splash of drama to his notes. He crafted verses that sang of stone guardians, flood-tamed rivers, and the queen's unexpected retirement, all while humming a tune that reminded him of a modern pop chorus. We will rock you," but with papyrus instead of guitars. The ink smelled of burnt reeds and ambition, a perfume that would make even a mummy sit up straight when he finally sealed the scroll with wax. The scent of heated resin mingled with desert dust, sealing the legend for ages to come. At the heart of the legend lay the Sphinx's secret role, a cosmic harmonizer, balancing the sky's fierce fire with the river's cool whisper, its massive gaze aligned with the constellations, channeling starlight into the Nile's currents, ensuring that floods arrived like a well-timed drum solo, loud enough to nourish, but not enough to drown the fields. The stone's paws, edged with ancient runes, acted as conduits, translating celestial chatter into a watery lullaby that soothed the crops and calmed the farmers' nerves. This hidden function made the monument more than a mere statue. It was a living thermostat for Egypt's soul, tweaking temperature and temperament with the precision of a master chef seasoning a stew. Even today, when the wind whistles through the Sphinx's nostrils, locals swear they hear the faint echo of that ancient balancing act. Thus, the legend of the Sphinx endures, a story told over flickering campfires and streaming hollow projections alike, reminding each generation that even stone can have a sense of humor. Travelers pause, feeling the cool breath of the Nile on their necks and the warm tickle of sun on their faces, realizing they stand at the crossroads of sky and river, just as the ancients did. The monument secret, now engraved in Khepri scrolls, spreads like a meme across the sands, whispering that harmony is found when opposites hug like old friends at a reunion. As night falls, fireflies dance around the Sphinx, turning its shadow into a living, breathing silhouette that seems to say, "Yo, I'm still here, still watching, still keeping the beat." And so, the sentinel watches, the kingdom thrives, and the legend lives on, forever a rock-solid punchline to the universe's grand joke. The year is 31 BCE, and the whole Mediterranean is glued to a drama that feels more like a reality TV showdown than a war. In the glittering palace of Alexandria, Cleopatra VII reclines on a throne of lapis lazuli, while incense curls like ghostly ribbons around her scented chambers. She sips wine that smells of figs and honey, eyes glittering as she watches a Roman triumvir, Mark Antony, swagger in, his armor flashing like a Roman Instagram filter. Across the sea, Octavian, future Augustus, tightens his grip on the western provinces, his campfires sending salty smoke into a night sky. The world holds its breath, waiting for the tide to turn, and nobody knows if Cleopatra's eyeliner will survive the coming storm. Inside the palace, whispers swirl like the perfume of myrrh, each conspiracy more tangled than a cat's tail. Cleopatra, ever the master of political makeup, drapes herself in gold in seduction, promising Antony a slice of Egypt's grain and the Nile's sweet water in exchange for military muscle. Antony, whose ego could fill an entire legion, eats roasted pheasant while plotting a naval assault, his laughter echoing off marble columns like a soundtrack from a blockbuster epic. Meanwhile, Octavian sends secret messengers through the market stalls, their cloaks smelling of fish and rope, to remind everyone that Rome rarely forgives a broken promise. The tension crackles louder than the torches in the courtyard, and the scent of fresh bread mixes with the metallic tang of impending conflict. When the fleets finally line up at Actium, the scene looks like a gigantic floating festival that went terribly wrong. Antony's ships, painted with Cleopatra's royal crest, glide out of the harbor, while the queen herself stands on a gilded barge, her hair scented with lotus and sea salt, waving a palm leaf fan like a queen in a music video. Octavian's legions, disciplined as a marching band, unleash a barrage of javelins that whistle through the salty air, making the waves sparkle like a disco ball. The water churns into a frothy mess of oil, smoke, and the sour smell of burned rope, while on deck, soldiers shout curses that sound like modern-day memes about that moment when you realize you're doomed. The clash feels as inevitable as the finale of a superhero crossover, only with fewer CGI explosions and more gut-wrenching sweat. The battle erupts into a chaotic symphony of splintered wood, screaming men, and the metallic roar of Roman artillery. Cleopatra's barge rocks violently, her silk gowns flapping like flags in a storm as she watches Antony's fleet falter, the sea turning a murky brown from blood and oil. Antony, eyes wild with fury, shouts orders that cut through the smoke, his voice rough as the sand under Rome's sandals. Octavian, perched on a prow, points his sword toward the enemy, his soldiers chanting victory chants that sound suspiciously like today's viral chants. The air is thick with the stench of death, the taste of salt on everyone's lips, and the bitter realization that the tide has turned against Egypt. When the smoke clears, Cleopatra's dreams drift away like ash from a burned papyrus scroll. Octavian's legions march into Alexandria, their sandals stirring dust that smells of old incense and defeated ambition, while the queen retreats to her chambers, her heart beating like a war drum in a tragic ballad. In a final, theatrical gesture that could rival any Netflix finale, Cleopatra summons a poisonous asp, its hiss echoing against marble walls as she ends her own story with a sigh that smells of rosemary and regret. Rome, victorious, crowns Octavian as Augustus, setting the stage for an empire that will dominate for centuries, its legacy as loud as a celebrity's Instagram feed. The fall of Cleopatra's Egypt becomes a cautionary tale, a glittering empire reduced to rubble, reminding us that even the most dazzling crowns can crumble under the weight of history's relentless tide. Cleopatra snapped her golden bracelets and ordered the Nile's armada to fan out like a glittering comb, each trireme humming with oars and the scent of river mud. She sent swift galleys to the Levant, their sails catching the salty wind that smelt of cumin and sun-baked figs. In the shipyards, sailors practiced maneuvers, while cooks tossed spiced fish onto open fires, filling the air with sizzling perfume. Grain barges, bulging with Egyptian wheat, were escorted by armed escort vessels that rattled like a rock concert bass line. The queen watched from her palace balcony, feeling a mix of pride and the jittery buzz of an Instagram influencer, counting likes. Only this time, the likes were lives, saved from famine. Meanwhile, Antony's legions thudded across the dusty plains of Macedonia, their sandals beating a grim march that sounded like a badly tuned drumline. Flags fluttered like oversized Instagram stories, each one promising glory and a hefty paycheck from Rome's war budget. The troops grew restless, their campfires crackling with the smell of burnt leather and cheap wine, while veteran centurions whispered that Octavian's shadow was longer than an NBA player's wingspan. As they approached the Greek coast, the horizon glowed orange, a visual cue that the showdown was about to go live. Even the gulls seemed to squawk a sarcastic game over as they circled above. In the dim back rooms of Alexandria, a network of spies slipped through shadowy alleys, returning with rumors that Octavian was stockpiling silver in siege towers like a kid hoarding Lego bricks. Their reports dripped with irony. The Roman triumvir had never bothered to learn how to make a decent baklava, yet he could arrange an empire-wide supply chain in a heartbeat. Cleopatra paced the marble corridors, the cold stone cool against her bare feet, while doubts swirled around her like a perfume commercial gone wrong. She wondered if aligning with Antony was as smart as a celebrity couple's ill-fated collab, flashy but destined for a messy breakup. The queen's heart hammered like a drum, each beat echoing a distant clash of swords she could already taste in the salty air. Back on the Nile, the newly trained crews practiced crossing the cataracts, the water churning into a frothy, coffee-colored whirlpool that soaked everyone's boots. Grain ships creaked under the weight of wheat, the golden stalks rubbing together and releasing a sweet, earthy perfume that reminded the sailors of home-cooked flatbread. Cleopatra's commanders drilled the crews to row in perfect sync, their chants sounding like a stadium chant at a soccer match, complete with occasional offbeat claps. The fleet's flag, an ornate cobra coiled around a trident, fluttered defiantly, as if daring Octavian to try a TikTok challenge and fail. The queen watched the polished hulls, reflecting the scorching sun, feeling a bizarre mix of exhilaration and the nauseating smell of fish guts that clung to the deck. As the months slipped by, the sky over the Mediterranean darkened, gathering storm clouds that hissed like an angry cat, demanding attention. Tension crackled in the air, more pungent than the incense burning in Cleopatra's temples, as both sides tightened their grips on swords and scrolls. The Egyptian queen, now wearing a crown that glittered like a superhero's helmet, steadied herself for the inevitable clash at Actium, where history would later call her the ultimate drama queen. She whispered to the river, "May your currents carry our hopes, not our defeats," while the Nile's roar answered with a guttural, almost sarcastic chuckle. In that moment, the gathering storm felt less like a threat and more like a dramatic soundtrack cue, ready to blast the final act of this ancient thriller. The Ionian Sea boiled like a cauldron of spilled wine, its turquoise surface broken by the clatter of oars and the thwack of Greek fire rockets. Day after day, Roman and Egyptian squadrons darted past each other, turning the waterways into a chaotic ballet of sails and smoke. Merchants on distant cliffs shouted warnings, their voices tangled with the gull screeches. The wind carried the salty tang of seaweed and the metallic bite of fresh blood from sunken triremes. Every sunrise felt like a new episode of a reality TV show where alliances shift faster than a pop star's Twitter feed. Mark Antony, draped in a purple cloak that flapped like a flag of indecision, commanded a fleet swollen with Cleopatra's sleek war galleys, each painted black as a catwalk runway. Cleopatra herself stood on the prow of the flagship, her eyes glittering with the same fire that lit her incense burners back in Alexandria. Their ships cut through waves as if slicing through a giant bowl of jello, leaving frothy wakes that glittered under the Mediterranean sun. Yet the Romans, stubborn as a mule, countered with disciplined rows of legionary marines who sang battle chants louder than a stadium chorus. The clash was a symphony of clashing metal, shouted orders, and the occasional accidental splash of a sailor's forgotten lunch. Soon, the tide turned sour. A sudden squall hurled rain like 1,000 angry cats, drenching the decks and turning decks into slip-and-slide arenas. Several of Antony's veteran oarsmen muttered curses, their faces slick with sweat and sea foam, and began to question why they were fighting for a king who seemed more interested in Cleopatra's perfume than victory. Whispers spread like gossip at a Roman bathhouse. "Did you hear the admiral wants to go home for a love song?" The morale sank faster than a sunken cargo of olives, and a few captains even threatened to abandon ship if the next clash didn't favor them. By night, the galley kitchens coughed up rancid broth, the stench of overcooked fish mixing with the sour scent of fear. On a moonless night, the fleet's lanterns flickered like fireflies on a caffeine binge, casting jittery shadows over rotting rope and splintered hulls. The air reeked of burnt pitch, salt, and the occasional waft of Cleopatra's jasmine perfume, an odd perfume note that made soldiers wonder if they'd been drafted into a luxury spa. Cannons cracked with the enthusiasm of a kid popping bubble wrap, sending shrapnel skittering across decks like confetti at a wedding gone wrong. Meanwhile, a crew of disgruntled sailors sang a bawdy shanty about the handsome Roman who can't decide between love and war, their off-key chorus echoing across the waves. The whole scene felt like a gritty blockbuster where the director forgot to cue the heroic music, leaving only the raw roar of the sea. All these sparks and splinters primed the stage for the showdown at Actium, where the sea would finally decide who owned the spotlight. Antony's fleet, now a patchwork of exhausted crews and glittering Egyptian barges, looked like a rock band with half the instruments out of tune. Cleopatra, ever the drama queen, promised to bring all the glamour of Alexandria to the battle, though her warships now smelled faintly of wilted figs. The Roman forces, crisp as a freshly pressed toga, tightened their rows, their eyes gleaming with the cold calculation of a chess master. As the sun rose over the horizon, the Ionian Sea held its breath, ready to swallow the losers and crown the victors in a tale that would echo through history like a meme gone viral. On the sweltering morning of September 2nd, 31 BCE, the Aegean churned like a frothy latte as two colossal fleets glared at each other off the coast of Actium. The salty wind carried the clamor of oars, the sharp scent of tar, and the nervous mutterings of sailors who knew they were about to rewrite history. Octavian ships, painted in the austere gray of Roman discipline, lined up like a legion of steel-tipped toothbrushes. Meanwhile, Antony's mixed armada, part Roman, part Greek, part Egyptian, looked like a costume party gone wrong, a mashup of styles that would make a Marvel crossover jealous. When the signal flare split the sky, Octavian's legions seized the moment with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance routine, their rowers pulling in perfect sync as if each oar were a metronome. The Roman ships cut through the water, their bronze rams glinting like shark teeth ready to bite. Antony's crews, a patchwork of seasoned veterans and green recruits, stumbled like a group chat trying to coordinate a raid. The Roman commanders shouted orders that rang louder than a stadium announcer, and the enemy formation began to wobble under the pressure. Cleopatra, perched on her gleaming trireme, watched the chaos with the calm of someone sipping a chilled hibiscus drink on a summer patio, until the first flaming arrows slammed into her flank. Her flagship sails billowed, catching fire like a Hollywood pyrotechnic spectacle, the acrid smell of burning pitch mingling with the sea's brine. Panic spread through her fleet. Rows of Egyptian ships turned tail, their oars splashing furiously as they fled the inferno. It was a retreat that smelled of burnt wood and crushed empire, a scene even the most seasoned pirate would call the worst traffic jam ever. The battle crescendoed into a Roman triumph that felt like the finale of a blockbuster saga, complete with cheering soldiers and a thunderous roar that echoed across the gulf. Octavian's men hoisted their standards, the reds and golds flashing like celebratory fireworks on New Year's Eve. Antony's forces, now scattered and demoralized, looked like a busted Lego set, pieces strewn, some still smoldering from the earlier blaze. As the dust settled, the air grew thick with the coppery tang of blood and the bitter taste of defeat, sealing the fate of the once glamorous Egyptian alliance. News of the crushing Roman victory rippled back to Alexandria like a bad rumor, and Cleopatra's kingdom began to feel the cold, hard grip of impending doom. The streets filled with whispers of lost glory, the perfume of incense now mingling with the sour stench of political rot. In the aftermath, the once proud queen faced a tragic finale that would later inspire countless movies and memes about going down in a blaze of glory. The Battle of Actium thus stands as a bittersweet tableau, triumph for Rome, tragedy for Egypt, and a reminder that even the most dazzling empires can crash like a badly edited CGI explosion. When the bronze horns of Actium fell silent, Antony and Cleopatra fled like two desperate actors, slipping off a crumbling stage. Their galley groaned under a sky dripping with the salty stench of a sea that seemed to mock their defeat. Rowers strained, their muscles trembling, while the sun painted the water in a cruel, golden glare. In Alexandria's harbor, lanterns flickered like nervous fireflies, casting jittery shadows on faces bruised by loss. The air tasted of iron and burnt incense, an ominous cocktail that foretold the end of an era. Back in Egypt, the royal couple tucked themselves into the palace's marble corridors, where every echo sounded like a funeral march. Octavian's legions marched in, their sandals clacking like a metronome of inevitability, while the Nile hissed quietly beyond the walls. Antony, his pride shattered, stared at his reflection in a puddle and saw a man who'd forgotten his own name. Cleopatra, ever the dramatist, whispered plans of a glorious exit, her voice dripping with both defiance and dread. The scent of papyrus and dried figs mixed with the acrid smoke of torches, creating a perfume fit for a doomed love story. When the moment arrived, Cleopatra chose the ancient snakebite method, but even that felt like an over-the-top special effect. The asp slithered through her silk robe, its scales flashing like a tiny green lightsaber against the candlelight. She inhaled the scent of jasmine and desert sand, closed her eyes, and let the venom do its work, as if she were exiting a Broadway show. Backstage, Antony, meanwhile, met his own grim finale with a sword that sang a final, mournful note against his breastplate. The palace walls seemed to weep, the stones dripping with the salty remnants of tears and blood. Octavian strutted in, victorious, like a Roman version of a reality show host announcing the final elimination. He declared Egypt a Roman province, tearing the Ptolemaic dynasty's banner as cleanly as a cat, ripping apart a ball of yarn. The locals watched, half amused, half horrified, as Roman standards rose. Where Cleopatra's lotus once floated, the empire's bureaucracy rolled in like a conveyor belt of stone tablets, each stamped with the seal of Rome. No more exotic spices, just hard-won order. It was the ultimate plot twist, the kind of spoiler that even binge-watchers of historical drama would gasp at. In the centuries that followed, the Mediterranean reshaped itself around the new Roman axis, its currents carrying gossip of the fallen queen like a viral meme. Trade routes hummed with the clink of Roman denarii, while the Nile, forever indifferent, kept on its lazy, muddy song. Scholars later likened the fall of the Ptolemies to the end of a massive, multi-season saga. Think Game of Thrones. Without the dragons, just legionaries. The cultural ripple spread. Roman law replaced Egyptian mystique, and the world stepped into an era where empire ruled over myth. Yet, every time a sunset paints the desert gold, old whispers rise, reminding us that even empires can be as fragile as a paper crown. The sun hammered down on Thebes, turning the market streets into a sea of sweltering heat and clamor. Vendors shouted over the clatter of carts, the smell of cumin and goat milk hanging thick in the air. Among the chaos, a young scribe named Neferet slipped her ink-stained robe through a crowd of sand-caked laborers. Her eyes darted like a cat's, hunting for a quiet corner where the hieroglyphs on papyrus could finally make sense. Little did she know that destiny was about to hide a secret in the very walls she was cataloging. While dusting the forgotten shelves of the temple archive, Neferet's fingertips brushed a brittle bundle that whispered of long-lost curses. The papyrus was tucked behind a cracked stone, its edges frayed like the shins of a marathon runner. She unrolled it with a gasp, and the parchment exhaled a musty perfume of dried lotus and old incense. Each line of hieroglyphs glowed faintly, as if the ink itself were still breathing. The discovery sent a shiver down her spine, faster than the temple's resident gecko, sprinting across the lintel. Before she could even stash the scroll, a cadre of robed priests materialized from the shadows, their sandals silent on the cold limestone. At their helm stood Imhotep, a man whose beard was as white as the Nile flood, and whose eyes twinkled with the mischief of a seasoned storyteller. He gestured for Neferet to sit, and the stone floor seemed to hum with a low, reverent chant. "You have found the hidden papyrus," Imhotep said, his voice smooth as wine. "And now you are invited to the club where we discuss eternal return, like it's the latest Netflix binge." The priestly circle welcomed her with a nod, whispering that the secrets within could steer a soul through the afterlife's gauntlet of monsters and paperwork. Imhotep unfurled the Book of the Dead, its pages lined with spells that promised safe passage past snarling jackal heads and rivers of fire that smelled like burnt papyrus. He explained that the text was not a dusty textbook, but a cosmic GPS, guiding the dead through each perilous checkpoint with riddles sharper than a sphinx's tongue. Neferet felt the weight of the verses, each glyph vibrating like a drumbeat in her chest, urging her to imagine an afterlife as crowded as a modern airport lounge, only with more mummified baggage. The priests demonstrated a chant, their voices rising and falling, and the air thickened with the scent of myrrh, mixed with the sour tang of ancient sweat. As the hymn ended, a soft rustle echoed, as if a hidden door had opened somewhere deep within the tomb, beckoning the curious and the brave alike. The night fell over Thebes, and the moon painted the temple walls silver, turning the scroll's ink into a faint, ghostly glow. Neferet laughed, half in awe, half in relief, realizing she now possessed the ultimate cheat code for the afterlife. No more endless loading screens of judgment. She imagined future tourists snapping selfies with the book, captioning them, "Just a casual date with the dead, no big deal." Yet beneath the humor lay a solemn promise that every whispered spell could spare a soul from the stench of rotting linen and the bite of a crocodile god. With a grin as bright as the desert sunrise, she tucked the papyrus under her arm, ready to walk the thin line between life's heat and the cool mystery beyond. Neferet and Imhotep trudged down the cracked limestone ramp of Saqqara, the heat rising off the sand like a furnace-level Instagram filter. The night air smells of stale incense and wet mud, a perfume no tourist brochure would dare sell. Their torches flicker, casting ghostly silhouettes on the towering step pyramids that loom like ancient skyscrapers. Every footstep echoes against walls, etched with hieroglyphs that read like a cosmic cheat code for the afterlife. They clutched the tattered map of the Book of the Dead, half believing it's a myth, half sure it's the ultimate spoiler for humanity's final episode. As they slip into the cavernous burial chambers, a choir of beetles scrapes across the stone, sounding like an out-of-tune karaoke night in an Egyptian disco. The air grows cooler, tasting of copper and ancient rot, a reminder that this is no museum, but a real tomb filled with centuries-old corpses. Shadows dance across the walls, where painted canopic jars glint like spilled wine in a dim bar. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the gloom. Kayamwaset, a priest with a crown too big for his head and ambition larger than the Nile. He points a polished scepter at the book, declaring he'll rewrite the afterlife script for his own political rise. Neferet raises an eyebrow, half amused, half terrified, as Kayamwaset boasts that the true teachings belong in the royal archives, not in the hands of renegade scholars. Imhotep steps forward, his sandal leather squeaking against the dust, and retorts that the book's power lies in its honesty, not in propaganda, something Kayamwaset treats like a Netflix spoiler. The rival priest laughs, a harsh cackle that rattles the ancient sarcophagi, and flicks a gold inlaid tablet toward a hidden passage, promising to seal the book forever. A swarm of scarab beetles erupts from the shadows, crawling over their arms like an uninvited fan club. The tension crackles louder than the distant thunder that threatens to wash away the desert secrets. The confrontation spirals into a dusty dance-off, with Neferet twirling a reed pen like a Jedi lightsaber, slicing through stale air, and Kayamwaset's inflated ego. Imhotep, ever the practical joker, pulls a papyrus scroll from his satchel and pretends it's the terms of service for the afterlife, demanding Kayamwaset sign with his blood. So dramatic, it could have been a Game of Thrones episode. Kayamwaset, red-faced, lunges for the book, only to slip on a slick pool of ancient oil, landing with a thud that sends a cascade of sand into the sacred chambers. The torches sputter, casting jittery shadows that make the hieroglyphs look like they're playing charades. In the chaos, the true meaning of the book whispers from the walls, promising that even the dead need a good laugh before the final judgment. Breathing heavily, the trio stands amidst the lingering smell of sandalwood and spilled oil, each aware that the afterlife's mystery has just gotten messier. Neferet clutches the book, feeling its cracked leather pulse like a stubborn heart, while Imhotep wipes beetle slime from his cheek, muttering that bureaucracy beats curses any day. Kayamwaset, humbled but not defeated, slips away into the tunnel, promising a sequel that would make Avengers Endgame look like a bedtime story. The necropolis sighs, the wind humming through the hollowed stones, as if the gods themselves are chuckling at the mortal drama. Their next move, to decode the next cipher hidden beneath the sarcophagus, because a mystery that good never stays buried. When the papyrus unfurled under the flickering torchlight, Maya and Karim could see the ancient spells crackle like tiny fireworks on the linen. Each hieroglyph sang of the Tuat, the Egyptian underworld, promising safe passage for the worthy. But a sudden gust slammed the chamber door shut, scattering dust that smelled like old parchment and a hint of copper. The ink of the final incantation bled outward, forming a jagged scar that looked suspiciously like a warning sign. A cold shiver ran down their spines as the air grew thick with the unmistakable perfume of a curse. the kind that makes even the sternest archaeologist mutter, "Not again." They plunged into the labyrinthine tomb, its corridors twisting like a mummy's knot of bandages. The walls were plastered with faded frescoes, their colors peeled away like sunburnt banana peels, while the scent of stale incense and wet stone assaulted their nostrils. Every step sent echoes bouncing off basalt slabs, a chorus of ghostly footfalls that sounded oddly like an old vinyl record skipping. In the dim, a cascade of water dripped from a cracked column, each drop hitting the floor with a thud that resembled a tiny hammer pounding on a coffin lid. Maya's flashlight sputtered, casting jittery shadows that stretched like elongated jack-o'-lanterns across the carvings, making the whole place feel like an Instagram filter gone rogue. At the heart of the maze, a massive stone door bore a riddle etched in gold. "What feeds the dead, yet never eats?" Kareem barked out. "A funeral banquet." But the glyphs glowed red, indicating a wrong answer, and triggering a swarm of skeletal hands that clawed at their ankles. Maya whispered the true answer. "Hush!" The Nile's silence, and the stones shivered, releasing a gust of cool desert wind that smelled of sand and burnt reeds. The wind carried a chorus of whispers, each voice reciting a line from the Book of the Dead, testing their faith with questions about weighing the heart against a feather. When the scale finally tipped in their favor, a luminous aura enveloped them, making them feel like they were wrapped in a warm, glowing duvet forged by Anubis himself. Just when they thought the curse had been outwitted, the tomb threw a curveball worthy of a Marvel post-credit scene. A towering scarab beetle, armored like a tinfoil superhero, rolled down the hallway, emitting a buzzing that sounded suspiciously like a theme from, Hush, the Avengers, Hush. Kareem, never one to miss a pop culture jab, shouted, "Looks like we've got a real-life Thanos snapping his claws." The beetle halted at a pedestal, revealing a scroll that read, "Do not disturb the ancient paperwork," a bureaucratic curse that would make even the most hardened scribe roll his eyes. They laughed, half terrified and half amused, realizing that the greatest horror was a centuries-old admin error demanding a signature in hieroglyphic ink. With the scroll reluctantly signed, using Maya's improvised reed pen, the tomb's walls sighed, and the oppressive weight lifted like a sneeze expelled from a sphinx. The exit emerged into blinding daylight, the desert sun roasting the sand, while a distant camel caravan sang a tune that sounded oddly like a victory fanfare. Both scholars emerged, dripping with ancient mud, their clothes sticky with a mixture of beetle slime and centuries-old dust. Yet their hearts beat steady, proof that faith can outlast even the most theatrical of curses. They paused to glance back at the yawning entrance, where a faint glow still pulsed, as if the afterworld itself winked, saying, "See you later, alligator." And as they trekked back to their camp, they couldn't help but feel that the Book of the Dead had given them not just knowledge, but a priceless lesson. Never underestimate the power of a well-timed joke in the face of eternity. The torchlight flickered against the cold limestone as Neferet and Imhotep stepped into the vaulted chamber, their shadows dancing like ancient memes on a tomb wall. A scent of desert dust and incense curled around their ankles, mixing with the metallic tang of old copper that the stone guardian Anubis exhaled in silent judgment. Anubis, carved from basalt, loomed massive and solemn, its jackal eyes glinting like midnight on a smartphone screen. The duo exchanged a quick, nervous grin. Neferet whispered, "Ready for a career change," before they knelt before the mythic sentinel with a dramatis personae. Worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster, Imhotep lifted the ceremonial scepter, its tip dripping with a dark, oily resin that smelled like the inside of a mummy's tomb. Neferet recited the opening of the mouth incantations, her voice cracking like an old vinyl record, each syllable echoing off the stone like a rebellious ringtone. The air shivered as they touched the guardian's jawbone, coaxing the sealed lips to part with a soft click, like the satisfying pop of a can opening in a quiet cinema. Suddenly, the chamber reverberated with a chorus of ancient chants and a faint, ghostly giggle that could have been a mischievous deity or a sarcastic echo from the afterlife's backstage. The ritual sparked a blinding flare of hieroglyphs that burst across the walls, their symbols swirling like neon tattoos on the night sky. In that luminous vortex, a hidden truth unfurled. The afterlife wasn't a bleak, endless desert, but a courtroom where moral judgment and divine mercy served coffee together. A golden scale appeared, wobbling between the weight of a sin-laden heart and a feather of truth, each side humming with the hiss of 1,000 tiny snakes. The revelation slapped Imhotep's forehead harder than a slapstick comedy, leaving him to mutter, "So, you're telling me death has a HR department?" Anubis's stone jaw creaked open fully, revealing a tongue of molten gold that tasted of honey-roasted figs and the faint bitterness of regret. The guardian's voice rumbled, paradoxically soft. "You thought the afterlife was a cosmic DMV. Instead, it's a mix and match of judgment and forgiveness, like a reality show where contestants can redeem themselves for a rose." Neferet laughed, the sound bouncing off the pillars like a marble-sized prankster, while Imhotep, eyes wide, imagined scoreboards flashing, moral points, and mercy bonuses. Irony dripped from the stone like water from a leaky faucet. Who'd have guessed that a 4,500-year-old spell could feel like a Netflix binge finale? The ceremony ended with the air thickening, the scent now a strange cocktail of incense, sweet figs, and the lingering ozone of a thunderstorm over the Nile. Neferet and Imhotep rose, their robes rustling like pages turning in a very heavyweight book, each step echoing the newfound balance they'd witnessed. They glanced at Anubis, who now wore a faint, almost amused grin, as if to say, "Welcome to the sequel, folks." With hearts pounding, like drums at a pharaoh's parade, they slipped away, carrying the secret that eternity isn't just judgment, it's also an unexpected, generous punchline from the gods. When the secret finally snapped into focus, a hush fell over the sun-baked streets of Thebes, then exploded into a chorus of awed whispers that rattled the market stalls like a drum solo at a pharaoh's birthday party. Merchants paused, the scent of spiced lamb and river mud hanging heavy, as scribes hurried to copy the newfound verses onto papyrus. Word spread faster than a Nile flood, leaping from village to vizier with the speed of a gossip-laden gossip chain. In a royal courtyard, the air tasted of anticipation and fresh incense, while dust swirled like confetti at an ancient rave. Even the stone statues seemed to lean in, curious about this fresh script that promised a ticket to the afterlife. Soon, the Book of the Dead sprouted into every burial chamber, like a fashionable accessory, more essential than the mummy's gold cufflinks. bakers of the underworld, the embalmers, began chanting the spells aloud, their voices echoing against the walls, plastered with hieroglyphs that glowed like neon signs at a midnight concert. Families layered coffins with parchment, the papyrus crackling under fingertips. It sent a blend of papyrus perfume and the earthy musk of the burial pit. The dead were no longer silent strangers. They rode the river of stars, guided by illustrated maps that looked like ancient IKEA manuals for the soul. Even the lowliest laborer demanded a copy, believing that a well-placed spell could keep the afterlife's bureaucrats from sending a rejection letter. Neferet, ever the meticulous chronicler, slipped a reed stylus into her palm and began etching every twist of their adventure onto a fresh scroll, her ink dripping like midnight rain on stone. She recorded the moment the priest tried to barter a goat for a missing verse, the goat's bewildered bleat echoing through the tomb like a bad karaoke rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. The parchment smelled of sandalwood and sweat, each line a tactile reminder that history is often written with both reverence and a dash of ridiculousness. By the time she sealed the scroll with a splash of resin, the mystery was locked away, ready to be unearthed by future archaeologists armed with flashlights and a love for drama. Neferet imagined her future readers giggling at her notes, perhaps even posting a meme of a smiling jackal god with the caption, "When you finally find the cheat code for the afterlife." Ironically, the very people who once feared the dark beyond the tomb now treated the book like a bestseller, lining up for copies as if they were the latest Marvel movie ticket. Some nobles even tried to personalize their spells, slipping in jokes about losing socks in the afterworld, a nod to the timeless mystery of missing laundry. The priests, with a deadpan grin, warned that a poorly worded curse could unleash a bureaucratic nightmare akin to dealing with the DMV on a Saturday. Yet the whole kingdom chuckled, realizing that even eternity needs a good punchline. Thus the living word forged a legacy that echoed louder than any royal decree, turning the afterlife from a vague, misty concept into a well-planned itinerary. Tomb walls now glittered with colorful illustrations, each panel a storyboard of the soul's epic road trip across the stars. The Book of the Dead became a cultural cornerstone, as inseparable from Egyptian identity as the pyramids themselves, proving that a story told and retold can outlive even the most meticulous stone carving. Neferet's scroll, tucked away in a linen-wrapped chest, waits for an next curious hand to unroll its pages and laugh at the ancient humans who were, after all, just trying to avoid a cosmic paperwork nightmare. In the end, the mystery wasn't just about what awaited beyond death, but about how the living chose to write, share, and celebrate that mystery together.